Hello, everybody. Today I'm going to speak to an area on public speaking that there's information out there on how to stand in front of a group and be, confident in your abilities and deliver a great speech without rattling your nerves. But I'm going to try to break it down a little bit more on how to make sure that when you do begin your speech that you're set up for the best path to success. And a lot of this comes in the preparation and how you put your speech together. But there are a few areas that you can really focus on when you're doing this that basically set you up so you're in front of the group, that you're starting with areas that you're most comfortable speaking to. So if I'm going to give a speech and it's on a particular subject that I'm not real strong with, I want to make sure that the areas that I do have the most comfort with are the areas that I speak to first. So, for example, if I'm going to give a speech on building a house, logically, the order of building a house is you start with the foundation, you put a floor on it, you put your walls up, you finish it with a roof. So, most people would think, and just by natural flow, that that would be the order that I would present if I had to give a speech on how to build a house. Well, here's the thing. I don't really know how to build a house, but it's the subject that I've been assigned, or it's the subject that I've been tasked with giving, a speech on. So how I'm going to approach that is I'm going to try to come up with a reason to have the flow go in such a way that I lead with the areas that I'm most comfortable with. So when it comes to home building, obviously I know a foundation goes in, but I don't know much more than that on, how you form a foundation, how you make sure it's square, how you get the depth of the foundation correct, those types of things. I know a little bit about roofing, but I'm not real comfortable in the area of roofing because I don't know a whole lot about it. The area that I personally would have the most experience with on building a home is the framing, the walls. So if I'm going to give a speech, I'm going to try to have a reason when I present this in front of the group to lead with the walls. How do I explain my interpretation on how to frame a house? So you kind of have to come up with a reason or an explanation to your audience on why it is you're speaking to what it is you're speaking with, if it's an area that wouldn't necessarily come in the order that the audience might anticipate. So there's certain areas or discussions out there. There's a lot of your speeches, you don't necessarily have any order that it has to go in. It's just kind of how you determine what flows best. But for this particular situation, back to my home building example, if I'm going to be giving a speech on that and I'm up in front of the group and I'm starting off, I've given my introduction, I'm now ready to get into the actual speech itself. Well, by default, they're probably anticipating that I'm going to talk about the foundation first, on how to do a foundation. Well, no, in this particular situation, I'm going to try to explain myself in such a way on why I feel that designing your walls, building your walls is most important, because the reality is, and I've done my homework on this, assuming I have, and I know that X percentage of people move out of a new home built within the first 7 years of living there. Well, why do they move out? Because they don't like the layout of the home. So it's more important, in my opinion, to make sure that I'm designing and I'm building the walls in such a way on a home that it's going to be laid out in a way that I not only benefit from today, but I benefit down the road in the future with. So to me, building the walls is, and how you do that, how you lay it out, the actual construction process, that's more important than the foundation. So that in that particular example, that's how I would explain to my audience on why I'm covering it in the order that I'm covering it. But if it's an area that you're giving a speech on and you have all your information laid out there, you want to go through, and let's say it's an area that you can't just speak to because you're not all that knowledgeable in it, but you've done your homework, you've got your research laid out. So now it comes down to how do you put it together to actually present it. So kind of look at your information, group it together, have all of it in front of you, and say, okay, I have to present all of this information. Now look at it from another angle. What areas do you know the most of without needing assistance from either visual aids, note cards, PowerPoints, whatever it is? What areas can you speak to naturally the most effective? Those are the areas that you want to single out and try to lead with in your presentation. Because here's what happens. As you begin speaking and you're comfortable speaking to the topic that you're speaking on, you build confidence. So the more confident you are early, the more you're going to hold your audience. The more confidence you build as you go, and that just builds to your credibility. So when you get to areas that you're not so confident on, just by or not confident, but knowledgeable. When you're not so knowledgeable on an area, and that's the area you come into, at least you've had a successful start to your speech. It's been a few minutes now, you've been speaking, you're comfortable, the group's comfortable, you've gotten a few laughs here and there, things are going well. Well, now you're getting into areas that you may not have as much knowledge on by default. So now you have to rely more on your PowerPoints or your visual aids to make sure that you're hitting the key points on the particular topics that you need to cover. So I hope that makes sense, but try to lead your speeches with areas that you are most knowledgeable on by default without needing the help of visual aids or tools to remember your talking points. So the next thing I would say, as far as giving effective speeches and not losing your nerve, present the information when you have all your information together again. You've looked at it. You've got, man, I've got a lot of information here I have to present. How am I going to go about doing this? The first thing you want to do is you want to take that information and you want to organize it into threes. Okay, so you want to group it. You want to say, okay, this information is related to this. This is related to this. I'm going to put this in its own grouping. So now I'm speaking to this. The next step you want to do is you want to take the next set of information that's related to each other. So you say, okay, I've got A, B, or I've got this kind of related to each other. This I could label as an A. This kind of has a relationship as an A. This is a B. This is a B. This is a C. This is a C. You want to continue that process on grouping your information together. Then you're going to put that second group of information that relates to each other. That's going to be the second component of the main body of your speech. And then the last thing you want to do is you want to take the last set of information that you haven't discussed or presented yet, and you're going to group that information together. That's how you create flow in a speech that makes sense, so you're not bouncing around from one thing to another, and it feels like sometimes you're coming back to information because you didn't have it grouped to the appropriate position in your presentation to begin with. So take all your information, lay it out in commonalities, what's related to each other, and then group that information together and lay it out in threes. And one little trick here that I use on giving speeches or presentations, I try to group everything into threes. So my introduction, I have 3 parts. My body, I try to have 3 parts. The body could be maybe 4, maybe 5, but it's grouped accordingly. And then my conclusion, I have 3 parts. So instead of looking at this speech that I have to prepare for in front of me and getting overwhelmed with it, I've now broken it down into 3 parts. My introduction, I'm going to cover who I am. I'm going to cover why I'm qualified. And I'm going to say, this is what you can expect to get out of this speech today, or this presentation. This is what you're going to learn. So I've broken my introduction down into 3 parts. The body of my speech, I'm going to do the same thing. Just as I just mentioned as far as the information and grouping it together, I'm going to cover the group of information in block A together. Okay, I've got that done. Now I'm going to cover B. I'm going to cover all the talking points in point B. I've got that done. Now I'm going to move to C. And you do that however many levels you need to do it to cover all the information. But you make sure that you go ahead of time when you're preparing this and laying this out. You group all of that information so it comes in a flow. It builds confidence. It allows you to stand in front of the group and gain a little tempo, gain a little rhythm to the speech. And the speech just flows much better when you lay out the information in a systematic order. And then the last thing you get to is your conclusion. I'm going to break it down into threes. Now the conclusion and of course your intro are a lot shorter than the main body presentation. But let's say for my conclusion, I'm going to give the first thing I'm going to lead with are other tips. Other resources that maybe you could turn to if you were looking for additional information. Then I'm going to recap the material that I just presented in the body. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to close with my call to action. Now, each group, of course, you can break down into threes however you feel you want to. Maybe you don't want to lead with, your name and who you are and why you're speaking. Maybe you have a different approach you want to lead with. But break the overall introduction down into threes. Break the body down into threes, fours, fives, whatever it takes on the body, but group your information. And then on the conclusion, break it down into threes. That allows you to focus on each area in your preparation, and you don't become overwhelmed. And then when you're actually giving the presentation, in your mind, you can be saying, okay, I touched on those 3 things in my introduction. I know I'm good to move on. It doesn't allow you to kind of panic and lose place on where you're at in your presentation. Okay, so just a few other areas here that I'm going to touch on as far as things that assist as far as keeping your nerve when you're up in front of the group. It allows for a better presentation. And these are little things. You've probably heard some of these before, maybe not. But obviously on the day that you're giving the speech, don't do something crazy or out of your normal. routine. Don't drink a ton of caffeine. Don't do something that's going to kind of make you different than what you may normally otherwise be. Just be yourself, but make sure you're controlling, as far as especially caffeine. That's one that always pops out at me. Don't go crazy on the coffee that morning because you're just anxious. Just make sure you keep things to a normal level. The other thing that a lot of people don't realize, but leading up to a speech, I mean, giving speeches always have a negative, oh, you got to give a speech, or oh, I'm dreading this. Well, speeches are one thing, but I think more than anything, as far as why people freak out or panic over speeches, is because our mindset is such that it just has a negative connotation. So don't allow yourself, once you know that you have a speech coming up, just say, okay, from this point forward, I'm not going to relate it to a negative thing every time it comes up. It's just something that I have to deal with. I have to get it done, and I'm going to treat it like anything else that I have to do throughout the day. So that means preparing, that means being ready for it. But don't let yourself fall into, oh, I got to give a speech. Oh, I got to prepare for that. I'm dreading it. Don't do that. Don't do that with your mindset. Just stay positive, and I know it's difficult, but stay as positive as you can in your thought process leading up to the speech, because that way it'll allow you to get through it a lot smoother. And the other thing is just leading up to the speech in the first day or two or three, whatever it is, as you're approaching, don't go around your negative influencers. Those people in your life that are always negative on everything you do. Just avoid them. There's nothing worse than just surrounding yourself with negative people, when you're leading up to something that you're dreading to begin with. The last thing I'm going to close with here is just a couple quick thoughts, and more of a recap than anything. But just biggest thing to keep in mind when giving a speech. It's never fun to look forward to it, but if you can start off the speech strong, you're going to have absolutely no issues giving the speech. So, like I had mentioned earlier, talk first to topics you know best by heart, just by default without having to do a lot of research. And if you lead with those topics that you're comfortable with, things just flow. Your audience will trust what you're saying. You'll be a credible expert standing before them presenting, and just have fun with it. Things will go well. Until we talk next time, thanks for your time, and have a good day.